Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the On the Workbench episode. This is going to cover a little bit of painting process on the Victoria Miniatures Desert Scorpions. Now, I do have a video on the YouTube channel that covers the original group. These were done in acrylics. What we're going to do is just show you how we take the same colors and try and do them in oils. We also have some metallics here, right? And you can see it's sort of a limited kind of palette. Now these are basically the female versions. If you want to see what the male version looked like, here's another little picture of the whole squad. So it's a squad of 10, and obviously the khaki, the greens, and obviously the headscarf that we're going to be doing here. There's your reference picture right over there. Now I do have another batch of 5 right here that I was doing on the stream. And here, let's get a little comparison for you here. So you can see we've got the italics on the laser pointers there. Now, of course, the female character is going to give a little bit more of the rosiness to them, a little bit less of the greenish tones. But you can see we got obviously got to match the pants there, the tunic, and the headscarf. Doesn't really require a whole bunch of different colors. And obviously we have to match backpacks and that sort of thing. And obviously we've got metal on the knives over here and a few other areas. Ironically enough, not on these, not on the shoulder things here. So what we're going to try and do is just take you through the process of doing the initial glazes on this and then working back in. Now the bases, I might be doing those with the acrylics just because time is sort of a sensitive thing with this project right here. And I might just do that off camera just to save some time because it's not supposed to be an involved army painting series. This is just supposed to give you a little bit of a flavor of matching something done in acrylics with oils. And we'll keep it pretty simple color-wise too. We're going to obviously have our usual cadmiums out there, cadmium yellow, light, and deep. I have started using this is the Gamlin Quick Dry White. It seems to be a little bit more effective than the Gamlin Fast Matte. Doesn't seem to be anything crazy or weird or flammable accelerants or something like that. I don't know really what the difference is. Now, this is actually from the old Winsor Newton starter set. The Winton starter set, this permanent green light here. And of course, this is from Williamsburg, this brilliant yellow pale. Now, we've been trying to figure out just what the heck is in this that gives it these really unique properties. I don't know if it's just the quality of the hand grinding or something like that makes it so effective, but this just seems to be extremely effective. We'll also be using our Gamlin silver, and we've got our indigo and Prussian blues, and of course some of our typical Van Dyke brown, asphalt, burnt umber. Not a lot of colors are going to be out on the palette, so it's going to be kept, again, pretty simple because we really don't need a lot, right? That green comes from here into the tunic, and some of a little bit of the tans probably going to come from the umbers as well. The pre-glaze won't be super elaborate, to say the least. We also are going to have some of our Terra Rosa involved for sure. Definitely a lot of the Terra Rosa. Now, this is a pretty darn effective skin combination all by itself. All by itself. We also have our makeup sponges. And we've also got some of our homemade filberts. Remember the last video that I did? We showed just quickly take this flat brush and turn it into a filbert. See those lovely rounded corners right there? Just so spectacular to have those rounded corners. Makes such a huge, huge difference. You wouldn't think so, but it really does. So again, it's been a while since I actually put paint out on the palette. I'll just do it just a minute or two here. And I'll just show you what this is like. So when this comes out of the tube, you can see that's basically the consistency of miniature paint, right? It's not really that much thicker, but it doesn't have to be exactly. And I know sometimes, well, is it Reaper thick, Vallejo thick? Even those paints are different. I mean, I've got Reaper paints that have a bunch of different consistencies just in the one paint line, much less from one paint line to another. So I wouldn't fret about that so much because guess what? If it's a little too thick or whatever for your taste, you just add a little more thinner once it's on the palette. So again, you can see that's very much a not super thick right there. This, of course, is our row of opaques, right? You know, it's now this is one I got to refill. It's getting a little bit on the emptier side, but if that was right out of the tube, it would be much more of a, oh god, and I'll show you too, because I have to actually remix one of my tubes anyway. So here's my Terra Rosa. That's going to go over here. And this tends to be, again, my row of opaques along that side there. Now, I don't have ivory black in the tube because it just kind of ran out, so I will just take this Gamlin. I'm just going to shoot over here, and you'll see the difference. You could see that that was much more, again, it's more like the consistency of peanut butter, which is why I'm not going to put a whole bunch out there because, well, it's all going to get, it's going to get cut with the thinner anyways. We'll get our asphaltum that typically is over here in the corner. This is sort of our wild card side. Then we've also got somewhere over here is my Van Dyke Brown. And that's the Gamlin Van Dyke Brown. For whatever reason, some of these other ones, like say the Winsor Newton Van Dyke Brown, tend to be a little bit lighter, almost like burnt umber, which is something we'll be putting on it pretty soon anyways. So here's a little bit of indigo. And by the way, this layout right here, I mean, this is pretty much anytime I use oils. Okay, so this is not some unique thing just for this. There might be more colors or maybe some different ones substituted, but this is a typical alignment right here. And we've got a Prussian blue that's going to go over here, and I really don't think, oh, the permanent green light, that's it. So just a little bit of the Prussian blue here. We don't need very much of it. Don't need, actually, I mean, you can see there's not a lot of oil paints out here, and this is more than enough to paint all 5 of these. Actually, I could probably paint 10 with these. All right, so there's our permanent green. We don't need much of that either. So that's it. For right now, this is it. So what we are going to do is we're going to get these, we're going to chop up that makeup sponge, maybe a couple of them, and then we're just going to throw our initial glazes on here. And again, I'll probably, actually, I'm just going to throw some acrylic paint on the bases here during the off session because there has to be literally a very specific color. It must be this color. So we're going to do this in the off, just between times, and then we'll get ourselves some initial glazes on our 5 miniatures, and we'll do that next. Let's get started with some of these pre-glazes right here, and it's going to be a little bit more simplified, a little more straightforward. And we're just going to also be kind of targeted with it. And I think we've had a couple episodes recently where things were just a bit more targeted. And that means maybe not quite the, oh, shall we say, slapdash? I don't know if, not sure how many people are even familiar with that word. But just also, a little bit of this green work its way in to the pre-glaze like this. Not a lot. It's not like this is supposed to be green, but it will give it just a little bit of a greenish flavor to it. That's just that permanent green. And what I'll do is I'll do this on a couple, and then I'm just gonna, we'll sort of go to the next stage, just kind of wiping off some of the paint, because I would like this to stay on here a little bit longer. The longer you leave this, the pre-glaze on here, the more of a staining effect that you're going to get. Now, not all colors are staining. The ones that are on here right now, they're not exactly what you would call staining colors, so they are not going to leave that much of an impact behind. I even just take a little bit of the ivory black in here, so that's how I can sort of get away with something that doesn't really, that's not pre-mixed, right? I'm just throwing it in with other things that already have a fair amount of thinner in them. All right, and we'll just leave this. And I'm actually going to move on to the next one before we fool around with some of these other areas here. Now we'll set this one aside because there is going to have to be some objects worth lighting on that. Now, as you can see, I'm staying away from the burnt umber just a little bit because it's a bit on the orangey side, and we want something that has enough of the green in it here. We don't want to have to, but last thing we want to have to do is just sort of fight against the pre-glaze. Might have to throw some more of that permanent green out there. And as I said before, that's just a very, very, very basic Winton starter set color from that set of 10. Nothing terribly fancy about it. So the more targeted that I am here, it's because, well, these things are they're obviously pretty small, right? They're pretty small as figures go. And sort of like with the, oh gosh, I would say not the Asterix, but the Thousand Suns, right? Well, that was another case of we were a little bit more targeted with that pre-glaze, even though it was a unit, more targeted with it. If I didn't have to match these colors, as in match these colors, I could be, if they just had to be in the general family, close enough, that'd be different. But these have to be the same, so that changes the parameters a bit. Changes those just a wee bit. So what I'll do is I'm gonna do one more, and then we're gonna swing back around and start to do a little bit of pre-glazing in some other areas while we also try and hunt down that permanent green light and see if we can get some more of that out here. We won't need so much more after this stage. This is pretty much where most of it ends up. For some of the darkest colors in the, say, the pants and such, I think it was that permanent green light mixed with some of the indigo, actually. And you say, wait a minute, the tunic there was almost darn near white. Well, we are removing this, right? We are going to be taking this away with our sponges, or at least a good portion of it. At least a good portion of it. Maybe not so much on the pants. I might even cut up some of those sponges. I've got some smaller ones, right? Usually end up with some smaller pieces, but I might even take some of the bigger pieces and cut those into smaller ones. All right, I think we got a little too much green there. We're just going to throw a little bit of brown in there. Now here is our ivory black, and we're using our permanent green light. Then we'll swing around to the first one, probably throw in a little bit of Terra Rosa and such, where the skin might be. Good enough. So back around to the first one right here. And you could say I just threw that brown over here onto the figure. Actually, I just have some umber and some other things right here for the stock and the strap here. We'll throw some indigo over the las rifle itself. Going to use some asphaltum down here, even though the leggings will be much more of a tan. I mean, I suppose if you could use yellow ochre or something like that for it. I don't really. I have yellow ochre. I can't remember the last time I used it. I don't know. Maybe I should throw it out on the palette. But I've sort of been mixing my own anyways, so. Well, you never know. Sometimes a new color might just find its way out onto the palette. The asphaltum has a little bit more red in it. Well, it makes sense because it is Pigment Red 101, which Pigment Red 101 is also in Terra Rosa. It's in Burnt Sienna, so it's all in that same sort of family. Burnt Umber's going to have much more of a yellow to it. which is why when we sort of combine that with maybe a cadmium yellow light, that's why we practically get a yellow ochre. Back to the strap on this one here. And there's still going to be some overlap. And here I'm actually going to use a bit of a little bit thinner in there because there that the shoulder pad here has that scorpion on it. Need to get that to sink down in his hive. I just remembered I gotta do that on this one too. Might as well. Like the stock again. I mean, we're talking about more precision. I mean, precision, that's relative, I suppose, that term. I think a lot of people would say precision. Just comparative. When you compare it to other things, it is a little bit more targeted, a little more careful. Because sometimes that will actually save you a little bit of time. Sort of taking this approach to it, just being a little bit more judicious, not quite throwing things all over the place. That will not always be the case. Sometimes it'll actually save you more time. Just letting things kind of fly free more. I think we're all set there. Now what we'll do, we'll just clean out the brush here. And sometimes I will use some cleaner. Like here I am using the cleaner, and I'll show you that stuff in just a sec. This is the brush cleaner that we are talking about right here. And as you can see, it works for dried acrylic too. We have used it actually very, very well. I mean, even for getting primer out of a brush when we brush on the primer and such. So it really does a good job. Does a nice job. Now there's going to be a little bit of the Van Dyke brown. A little bit of the Van Dyke brown in here. Let's just get the rifle here much as we can, and then we'll go over the top of this with our silver. Maybe a little bit more of the, yeah, a little bit more of the Van Dyke brown there, which is going to take it off of the blue. Let's hit our next one here. Doing the same thing. Now I will also in the, well, maybe not right away because it's still a very current Twitch session, but maybe I'll just make a highlight of it sooner rather than later, and I'll throw the highlight link in there in the description of this, and then you can get a sense of what it was like painting these during the Twitch session, where we couldn't quite be so judicious like this, because, well, in a Twitch session, you don't just turn the camera off and go do something else. Doesn't quite work that way. We have a little more control over things here. That is why you see sometimes I'll kind of combine the two, right? I'll do some parts of it in a Twitch session, some parts of it in a video like this, because there are some things that actually do work better for a Twitch session, despite sometimes the additional activity of chats and other things. The longer format of it sometimes makes it a little bit better for actually doing things like the big creatures, right? Because an 8 or 9 hour session is really not that unusual for something like Twitch. Okay, so we've got some of our darker tones here. What I am going to do, and this was different than what we did in the Twitch session, we're actually going to wipe some of this away, and then we're going to do the skin and the head scarves. So this does see more of it stays behind. More of this remains behind, which is why I'm going to do these areas first, and then we'll hit things like the las guns and more recently applied paints. The other advantage of the smaller sponges like this, aside from just getting into these smaller areas, is that you tend to get a little bit less paint on yourself. Now, I mean, you can wear gloves, whatever. For me, it has more to do with as I'm streaming and I have all these other things that I usually have to pick up and show during the course of a stream. That's not always great to have paint all over my hands when I'm doing that. So it's another reason why the sponges get smaller and smaller. Remember, I used to use entire whole wedges. Then sometimes we would cut them a little bit just to make them smaller or to try and get more out of one sponge. Everything evolves. It will depend, and I know I say this an awful lot, it will depend on the miniature. Sometimes the miniature is going to dictate an awful lot. Now, I'm going to go back in here. I don't want as much of this to stay behind on the leggings because, well, they're supposed to be lighter anyways. So take some of that off. We'll get to this third one, and then we'll swing back around again to the metals, and then we'll move back to, I think first we'll put some of the Terra Rosa in where the skin's supposed to be, and then we will do the headscarves. And the reason why we're doing that is you can see as we do this, some paint gets on these other areas. Well, if we do those areas with the pre-glaze last, then we won't have quite so much of that covered up. It's some things that I learned when I was working on the figures that have more of the object source lighting, right? We didn't want to have to fight the original pre-glaze just to be able to get more lighting on there. So that was a kind of a new thing. All right, now time for the las rifles here. Take away just enough. Just enough. It's already, see, they got some shading on them there. A little more here. Okay, very nice. A little more here. Just enough. Don't want to take it all away. If I take it all away, that kind of, well, defeats the purpose. Now, we might even take ourselves a somewhat smaller brush here and, here we go. It's this is a 0. All right, we'll Terra Rosa. We will put, we are going to get some Fanchon Red out here. I forgot about the Fanchon Red. That's going to be a little bit important for the skin tones. Let's get a little bit of our Van Dyke Brown in this. Again, not worried about any lines or whatever at this point. I might just throw a little bit of my thinner in there. That would flow a little bit more. And Terra Rosa, you wouldn't think it's much of a staining color, but it sort of can be. So yeah, Fanchon Red is something we will bring back out onto the palette here. You've seen it used an awful lot. I don't know, I think there's other colors that might be similar to it, but it has opacity, but it's not a cadmium. It's almost like a cadmium red medium, I want to say. A cadmium red light medium. But I don't think it has cadmium prices to it. I guess that's where I'm going. I think it has some of the properties, especially the opacity of, say, a cadmium, but not I don't think it has the price tag. Well, and minus the heavy metals. So there's that too. I know for folks that get concerned about those things, that is not something that I worry about because I don't plan on eating it anytime soon. And it's in such infinitesimally small amounts, and it really doesn't come in contact with me very much. I mean, just to a very minimal degree, that's it. All right, now we've got some of our small sponges here. Take away some of that. A little bit, and then we will mix up something that we can throw on those headdresses. And that's going to get you through at least the initial glazing process here, or initial shading. That's when we come in with our lighter tones. So again, these smaller sponges really are handy. I'm using these more and more and more. But see, that's not too shabby, right? How much of that stays behind? So Terra Rosa, who'd have thought? I mean, it's an opaque color. Usually opaques don't necessarily, for all lack of a better term, stain that well. Now, where's that? Here it is. We'll just, again, we're going to get this a little bit cleaner using that same brush cleaner we were just talking about. And we are going to take some indigo, touch of our blue, and what we're looking for is kind of a grayish blue here. Something like that. Oh, I see we've got ourselves a... Let's just grab some asphaltum over here, and I'm just going to glaze that in there. Okay. And here, let's fire away at this. I think I need a little bit more of my regular blue in there. There's a little too much gray. Okay, I think we might have that balance now. And we can always add some more of the lighter, kind of bluish blue there instead of the gray blue. And I'm not necessarily going to do a whole bunch of removing of this. Just a little bit. Because obviously if I go to remove this, there's a pretty good chance it just ends up into everything else that we put on here. So we might remove just where it's easiest to get to. Next one up here. And the primer, as always, was just the Badger Stynylrez. We kept it simple. We always do. There's really not trying to do any kind of zenithal stuff. I've just done that less and less and less. When it comes to the oil stuff, yeah, just way less of the whole zenithal. Okay. And I think we got one more left. Yep. There's definitely a bunch of stuff that I kind of have to do off camera because I have to turn on my light. And it can only really be seen or reached with the lights on, and just it's very difficult to film. So, and also it would be like a 9-hour video, so we don't want that either. But I just thought this could be interesting for you. It's really more about transposing colors. Remember, we've done something like this before. I don't know if I even used that specific term, but I think it's a little bit like the early days of the contrast paints. Remember, we would take something that had been done in the more standard, I guess if you want to call them that, miniature paints, and then we did them in the contrast paints. Just to show them, was the Tully Cavaliers maybe were one of those? All right, so we're just taking away a little bit of it here. This is where the small sponges really come in handy. And we're taking off a fair amount. We want to just, some of it comes off because that means we can get more of our lighter color on there. without adding a whole bunch of paint to it, and then it doesn't take so long to dry. Because in this case, that's a factor. So there we have it. So there's a quick little pre-glaze. You can see the difference now between those. And this is always kind of neat to see this. So you can see the little progression here, right? A little bit of a progression. So what we will do next now, get off camera, I'm just going to hit these two real quick, do the same pre-glazy type things, and then we're going to start getting into some of these lighter tones. I think we'll definitely focus on things like the tunics and the pants first. I think that'll be the first thing we really lock in on, depending on time. And also we do have to establish the object source lighting on that plasma gun. So let's get to that next. Let's see what we can do with some lighter colors here. We're going to start out with this. We have to do this plasma gun right here. I mean, we'll just keep it simple. We've got a little bit of the Prussian blue mixed with a smidge of that white. I just want to figure out, okay, what exactly are we trying to illuminate here? Obviously, we're going to be hitting this arm. Not super extensive. Again, if this was just for me, it would be different. I'd probably take a little different approach to it, but we do what we must. We do what we must. Now, I think as we look back at this guy, that's pretty much about it. I mean, we went up a little bit further. Now, the pre-glaze, even though it has sat there for a while, you can see it's influencing what's going on here. So especially since I would prefer that this is more of a pristine color here, we're definitely going to make sure we clean up that brush. We're also going to try a little bit of a glaze in here just to get that blue down in the crevices. I'm not sure if I'm going to have to go to maybe a touch of cerulean blue here and there, or phthalo blue. Not sure just yet. We'll see what happens in a bit. I'm just going to set this over here. It's more just to remind me that it's going to get a bit of a glow, and I think maybe we'll even throw some of that beyond. Throwing that out to here. And that's it. We'll stick to that. Okay. Now, see what we can do on things like the pants. And remember, we had talked about they have to be this sort of, oh gosh, it's kind of this almost a bit of a bluish green. It's really, it's hard to describe. It's kind of hard to describe. Let's get a little bit of blue in there. And the idea is that, see, that's too much of a bluish green. So let's muddy that up a bit with some of that ivory black. And I think that sort of did the job. And in some of the darkest areas, maybe we even go so far as maybe even a little bit of indigo with that green. And I think the other thing I wanted you to see is that not all the time do we have to be using the large brushes. It's the miniatures themselves sometimes will dictate what is going to happen. If these were more open, more of like a space marine kind of thing, bigger, well, then maybe you see a bigger brush. But here, it would actually be a little less time consuming to go with the smaller ones. Just going to hit this with this, just kind of a one go round with it as well. Then I'm going to move on to some other areas here. The idea is, remember we talked about work on multiple figures, right? Let the paint set as much as you can. that's what we'll try to do here. We're moving on to the last one. I think in our next one, what we'll try and do is hit the skin tone for sure, or at least the opening phase of, say, the skin tone and the headdresses. All right, now for the tunics, let's see what we can do here to make those just a smidge bit brighter. See what happens. And now we're going to find out just how much we might be able to blend those with the pre-glaze. Just make sure we've got here. That's a little bit cleaner. And you can see we just kind of, again, we're doing some, we just place those colors and we blend the colors. Do the same here. Some big old brush strokes. And then we'll try and blend those with some of the existing colors. So you can see we've really saved ourselves a bunch of layers, right? Think of how many layers that might have been just in the old, the traditional. All right, please think, and it was. Go back and watch the YouTube video on the original set. And I will again. I will link that. I mean, you already have. I'm probably sure I somewhere in the links of general techniques that's in there. But what I will do is I will make sure I link that so you can see what it was like to paint essentially these same figures with the acrylics, and then now like this with the oils. This is a thing that I want to do more often. Actually, is this sort of, well, we paint the same thing in oils that we did with acrylics, vice versa. I've done a number of these with the dark sword stuff. I've even done an army painting series with the Necrons, where we did it once with the first time with the acrylics, and then the second time was with the oils. I've got some Song of Ice and Fire stuff I was going to do. There's even some more Lord of the Rings stuff that I was going to try. Again, armies that were done before, and we are going to try them again, but with a different medium, and see, well, just how different is that approach. Now, I could just use another one of these as a blending brush, but I'll stick with this one here. Now, this is, I will have to add some more greens into that, and that's going to be some of that permanent, not permanent, well, yeah, permanent green light, I believe it is. Because there's an awful lot of brown in this. We'll have to add some more of that green. But essentially what we're trying to do here is just circumvent a whole bunch of those extra layers. And as you can see, that's pretty darn, well, I don't know if you want to call it necessarily smooth, but it's smooth-ish for, well, no layers. Literally one layer. And that is, I think this kind of an approach will help you move through more miniatures more quickly. Because this process is already fast, because I remember, I mean, it was a while ago. I mean, for me, anything beyond a week is a while ago, but there was a lot of back and forth with those original guys. A lot of glazing after the fact and such to smooth out areas and get things down into these crevices, because I did not assemble these. They were already assembled, so I have to go with what I got. And you can see also to how little paint there is on that palette, right? But look at what happens when we take it over here. It looks like a ton of paint, doesn't it? And you can see, I mean, it doesn't even look like a brush stroke. It just looks like we're ladling that stuff on. But then we start to push this around. You start pushing that around, look what you get. That's something that you can build from right there. And how, I mean, that's so much smoother than, well, imagine if you did that with acrylics. Wouldn't quite work out the same. And the nice thing is that that'll probably, no guarantees it would still be that wet and workable the next day, but maybe it would be. Again, it depends on how little paint that you have and what the colors are, because some colors will, we've mentioned this already a couple of times, that some colors are just going to dry faster than others. I was thinking that, gosh, I don't even know what sort of a format that could be. Maybe even just literally an email you guys a list or something of, okay, here's the colors that I have. These tend to be more translucent. These tend to dry faster. These tend to dry slower. I might just do that. I know there had been discussions about, well, you put a mark on the paint container. Well, that's great if you can always see the paint containers. And as you can see, the paint containers, the labels get a little bit messy because I use them a lot more than most folks are going to. And they tend to get paint on them. So I'm not quite sure how much people will actually be able to see. Now here I got to go back and get some fresh paint because I was picking up an awful lot of the pre-glaze there. But you could see, just like we would do with the filbert brush, we're essentially using this as almost if it was a tiny, tiny filbert brush. Just sort of dancing the paint down the top there. Again, try and get some of the paint out of there. And we're going to come back in here and we're really just kind of try and shove some of that lighter color down into the recesses. Trying to do some serious blending over here. Like that. Okay, there we go. Already we're moving on to number 5 here. And this is another one. This is why I didn't bother with the right here, some that the flesh tone and the rifles yet, because just from experience, I know that I'm going to be bumping into those things an awful lot. Man, look at how little paint there is. It just doesn't take very much. And you can see it's even with this tiny brush, it still has the look of a dry brush to it, doesn't it? We're counting on whatever's there in the pre-glaze to mix with what we're putting on here. But we've probably saved ourselves minimum maybe 3 layers of paint if you were to call it the traditional acrylic approach, at least 3, possibly 4. Heck, for some folks, might have been 5. But we have saved ourselves time already. But for some, you might, maybe you do this for your initial layers, right? To just kind of bulk in this type of shading like this, right? This initial shading. And then let's say, okay, it dries. You don't get back to it, whether intentionally or unintentionally, and it's all dry. But you could still do oils over this. I mean, oils would be fantastic over this, but you could then proceed with some acrylics if you really felt the need to. So see how, I mean, look at, where's our guy that's okay. So I mean, you can see we're moving on along here. What I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna the tiniest bit of yellow get into there. Tiniest bit of yellow in. See, now I'm gonna start to focus on the stuff that is a bit lighter here. Might even have to think about some thinner, just to make sure that it doesn't get too thick. Not that it wouldn't stick, but just keep it thin enough so that the paint will dry with the speed that we're looking for. Now, of course, here, why would we have super light highlights back here when it should be in shadow anyways? So don't have to necessarily worry about that. Now, what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to do all of what you just saw there, and then I'm going to clean out this brush, and I will use this as my blending brush then. So instead of the larger brush that you saw, I'm going to do this just with what you see here. Then come back in and do a little bit of that blending. After I take the paint out of this, I'm gonna look at just one big old brush stroke thing. Well, I don't know how big that brush stroke was, but one little old brush stroke. We just charge right through these, right? We're not we won't be slowed down. Now I know for some folks this would probably drive them absolutely nuts if they had to try and work around stuff like that. You want to paint sub-assemblies? Well, that's fine. We used to do that all the time. Time and practicality and a bunch of other and the oil paints started to remove that necessity. It used to be, I mean, we had to do things in sub-assemblies. Then we realized, well, we weren't exactly gaining as much as we thought we were by the sub-assembly approach. And then when the oils came along, it offered other opportunities. It said, maybe you don't have to do the sub-assembly anymore. Which is, when you have to do as many figures as I do, very handy. Also, for folks that have a lot to do, who don't, miniature painting is not their livelihood, and they would just like to have armies painted to a nice degree and still have them out on the table in a reasonable period of time. Well, guess what? It's going to help you just as much. And we're not looking to go all the way up to final highlights here. We're just, we want to advance. Remember, we want to build evenly, right? We want to advance evenly everywhere across the miniature. So that's how we're getting each of these areas up to speed here. We'll take this to a certain degree. Then well, like I said, with the skin tone and the head scarves, we'll do that next. And then we will do the las guns and some of the other areas that also need their medals. All right, I think we've got that all ready to go. Now again, we just want to dry out this brush. We want to get the paint out of there, keep it nice and dry. Let's see what we can do as far as some gentle blending on this. And this is see, it's kind of a stippling action there. You can see it sort of carries that lighter color in either direction. It's like you're just spreading it around. It's almost like you're putting butter on toast. Probably should use that metaphor a little bit more often. It's like butter on toast. You slap that butter on there and you grab your knife and you spread it around. I suppose in some ways we're turning these tiny little brushes into very soft miniature palette knives just to push things around. Yeah, we just go from one to the next to the next. And there's nothing that says we couldn't do some glazing in some of the recesses here if we feel it's too light in the recesses or too dark. Remember, you can glaze light colors too with the oils, especially, gee whiz, especially with the oils. And I hope this really does illustrate how fast and easy this can be. It does not have to be difficult like this. We just got a bunch of lines there. See how we're just going to take that, the edge of that line, and the line is eliminated, but what's there now is a blend. Nice little blend like that. Look at that. Again, having painted these same figures with the acrylics, as I see that, I say, oh my gosh, I wish I could have done that. Wish I could have done that when I was painting those other figures. That was not possible. And there's something else I'm starting to notice now that it has been a long time of using oils and a lot of miniatures, and that I still paint with the acrylics. I'm starting to notice that the acrylics have a weird texture to them, like a weird dryness to them or something. It's hard to describe. It's like a sandy texture in comparison to the oils. I'm starting to notice that more and more. I did not notice that at first. It's just I think the more figures I do with the oils, it just going back to the acrylics, it's so unusual. I just start to notice it more. I think those of you that watch the Twitch streams, you know how we've seen how much more brilliant the oil colors are. I mean, just devastatingly more brilliant. It's hard to even compare how much brighter those oil colors are. And that's not taken in, say, something like a fluorescent paint or whatever. That's just regular oil colors. Leaving fluorescence aside, the oils make it easier to get darker colors in. Really fascinating. I'm just getting some cursory lighter colors here on the path. We'll do more. We also have to do the leggings. Remember that. We have to do those. But again, this is sort of a dry brush approach, but just with a really tiny brush. I think with the acrylics, what we'd be trying to do here is using, say, the clear liner paints, hoping that a little bit of translucency, or with the contrast paints, with their sort of semi-translucency, that if we painted it with a light enough touch, the underlying layer would show through, and we would get sort of a default blend that way. Last couple here. I might use the tiniest touch of thinner to kind of activate the color there. I will be going back in there with some of the indigo and that permanent green just to darken that down in these folds here. Probably on my own where I can turn on the light and actually see more what's going on there. Last one here. And from here, we will move on. See, look at how I'm able to I just got too light too fast and quickly just grabbed some of the dark that's just sitting there. It's just sitting there waiting for me to use it. I say, oh, look at, there's this dark paint over here, which is why this is your color storage device. And this becomes your palette. So that is good enough here. So next up, skin tones, and then I do believe we're going to try and get some of the metals on here because they're side by side, and I think they're going to have a big impact. No, this and their headscarves. I don't think we'll have time for the metals too, but if we do, we'll squeeze those in as well. Let's get to that next. So we wanted to work with the skin, and if you remember, we wanted to add some of our Fanchon red into this. So this is the Williamsburg Fanchon red here. Typically, I put it over here on the wild card side of the palette, and there's another, I don't know if it's really a color coding, but when I'm doing something like this here, was that the scarlet, right? The cadmium scarlet's going to go here, Fanchon red here. Now in the past we were doing alizarin crimson, but now that's where the quinacridone golden brown or the alizarin, something like that's going to go here. Egyptian violet, your purple's down over here, and then the asphaltum this way. So you can see that we do kind of progress through our darker and cooler reds. They get progressively cooler as they go this way. So there's, I guess, a little bit of color coding to it. And if you wonder where all this stuff kind of comes from, this really goes back to the old days of the Academy, where we always had titanium white in the one corner, and it just, the colors radiated around from that, whether it was light to dark from there or whatever. I think I do believe maybe there was a bit of strong suggestion and that you should really lay it out this way. It's been a while, so I don't remember just how strong that suggestion was, and I think it might have, as you got more experience with the oils, the suggestions got a little bit less strong, if that makes any sense. I think they wanted you to be able to, as you were watching a demo, because obviously the instructor would have his paints laid out in a very similar way, and I think that was designed to make it easier for you to maybe adapt what you saw him do. Now, look at that, pre-glaze, right? We have to go back over here. We have to get some more, and you'll see this as I kind of worked it. You'll see that darker color that's working in its way into what I'm painting here. So it's shading itself along the way. I don't have to work so hard to shade that. It's just sort of doing that by itself, and I'm really glad that I was hitting the faces here because I can already see there's some of the skin tone is getting on to where the metals are going to be. Now, for those of you that maybe not so used to painting armies like this, where there's a bunch of figures, oh boy, I don't even like the term you paint the miniature from the inside out. I don't really like that because I don't actually do that all the time, or even most of the time, or even some of the time. But you kind of say, well, you know what? There's a real good chance that as I go to paint this thing, I'm going to get paint on this other thing. So maybe I'll just paint that thing a little bit afterwards. When it comes to the finishing details on the face, that's a little bit different. Right here, this is kind of a rough, we're roughing out the work, right? When we're just trying to paint some eyes on those faces, well, that's a little bit different. We are not going to have quite so much paint on the brush. We won't be moving so fast. Just like that. When it comes to the more detailed type stuff, there's way less chance that paint's going to get on that. Because remember, the reason for this whole rigorous motion is to try and get the pre-glaze to blend with what we have on the brush here, and we're trying to put on the miniature. The Fanchon red, that's there to put a little more life in the skin tone. We want a little bit less of the green. It's not to put rouge on their face. if you looked at some of the hands, and I'll show you some of the miniatures that we did, the Fanchon Red, there's as much of it on their hands and arms as there is on their face, possibly even more, because you do have those blood vessels there, and that's kind of what it's all about. So there's a lot of Fanchon Red in that skin tone on that arm. You can see it here on the hand. You can see a bunch of so it's not just on the face itself. There's more to it than that. Put it in. This is sort of a semi-dry brush approach right here. As I do this now, I'm really glad that I am recording this process for you, because I think this is different than what you've seen. Boy, there is no skin tone on the face. That's all just cloth there. I did think too there was some interesting surface about the metal, right? We got metals to do, and so far we've really only used, as far as multiple figures, we did with the Osiarchs, the interference paints, but so far only the Necrons have seen any kind of mass usage of metallic paints across several miniatures. Then there's this idea with, not only do we have to match colors really precisely, but we have to match them with a different medium, from acrylics to oils. All right, so that's a good little start there. Let's see if we can pop up one lighter level here, and then the Fanchon Red actually gets introduced a little bit later. And we're not looking to do any finished skin tones here. We're looking to about 3/4 maybe. Get 3/4 of the way through. But you could see where where that was before. That was practically this right over here, and that's what we started with, and you can see how far we have advanced in not much time. And I think you can see that even see how that's even blending a little bit. I don't have to worry about blending it completely, because remember, the Fanchon Red that's still yet to get into the game here, and that's as we blend in that, then the real serious blending starts to happen. We move on. Now I'm going to get a little bit of thinner in this. I don't want that to get too thick. Don't want that to get too thick. And if you remember, these brushes here, these are those cheaper sable, not really sable brushes that might have been a Dark Sword episode where it was almost as much of a discussion about the brushes as it was about the miniature. And I know that just for whatever reason, the Dark Sword figures are good for those secondary discussions. I I know that. Okay, that's again no color on the face there. Yes, they are. Those videos are supposed to be about Dark Sword figures, but I know people really get into brushes too. These, like I said, they are not the most fantastic brushes they're far from it. However, they take up a lot of the punishment that would normally end up on some of the brushes that I do care about more. If this can save those quadruple zeros, also too, when these things get worn down, like any sort of sable brush will when you use it as much as I do, then they're actually really good for those pin line washes and that sort of thing. So it's like our one true brush, right? As it gets more and more beat up over the course of its life, it serves more purposes. Just get this form here. Also, too, in some ways, this is what would you say? This is more of an old school miniature here. Yes, it's new. It is certainly just sculpted in the last few years, but it sort of harkens back to a different time of sculpting. And some folks they like to have sometimes the nostalgia of figures that kind of looked like maybe when 10, 15, whatever years ago. I think the folks that are maybe more of whether like the large scale figures or busts or the fancier type of things, they're not as enthused about. They're not, and definitely not as into like, okay, so that's 10 years old. Why? What's the big deal about that? It looks 10 years old. And other folks really love it. Oh, I remember this. For me, and I remember was it the Bad Ruck video? That was one of those older sculpts getting some newer treatment. And I think there was the Blood Bowl figure or whatever. There was that video. Okay, let's proceed now to those head dresses or head scarves. And it might require same sort of blending brush approach. You can see we're just kind of dancing right over the top of this. We're letting the paint get on there as close to a dry brush as I can. So what I think we will do, remember what we did with the tunic and such. Put these colors in place. Clean out this brush as best as we can. And then do a little bit of blending. So you can see there's definitely some of the pre-glaze getting. Look at that. You can see how dark the end of that brush is. And we will just rifle along here to the next one. Close to a dry brush application as I can with this teensy, well, relatively small brush. Now on the backpacks here, you'll see the filberts, our homemade filberts, and on the gun itself too. A couple areas. Sometimes there's just a right place for a certain brush, and sometimes other brushes it's just not as convenient to use in a certain place. Now, what can we do here? Well, that's just, there's way too much paint built up on that thing. Here, we're just gonna hit that with a little bit of our thinner here. Like so. Over here. And again, what we'll do is we'll go back in there once we have this brush cleaned out as best as we can. We'll do some blending on the scarf. And I do remember, gosh, even on the acrylic ones, I think I had to go back and forth with these crazy headscarves to get that bluish color in there. Not something that I would have done very much, but remember we had to match. There was a color test figure that was sent, and that had to be matched, and it had a fair amount of blue in the headscarf, so had to match it. And did we do the top yet? Nope, didn't do the top here yet. Now there was a little bit of ended up filling in kind of a shadow area there that might want to end up being darker, but we still have a long ways to go to get to white yet. And we're still going to be blending these as well. Let's get our white here. Well, very much a bluish white. There's even a little bit of the indigo in here too. Not a bunch, I mean very little, but there's still some of it in there. Just to keep it somewhat towards gray. And the less paint that we've got on here, the more it's going to create the opportunity for us to be able to do things like that dry brush-like technique. Not full-on dry brush, but something akin to it. I think we got our last one coming up here. Like this. Okay. And there's metal that actually has to go on the goggles and actually the antenna of the backpack, and there's a few areas where it goes. Oh, almost forgot this. Almost ready to go to clean out that brush and maybe try and do just some real quick blending here. We take that paper towel, just do this. And then we'll just spread some of this out. Because remember what we've got, we can still do a definite highlight layer on top of that with our white. And that the Gamlin Quick Dry White, it's been really interesting using that. I tried using that fast matte. I used it a lot. I never really saw any real difference, like a discernible difference. And then I used the quick dry, and boy, that seemed to just I noticed it right away. I thought, well, maybe it's just a miniature. Maybe it was just the colors that I used in addition to it. But it's been tried on a lot of things now, so I do think there's something there. There's just a little something about it. So again, especially here across the face, you'll see I'm doing that scumbling action. We're not just brushing over it. There's a very specific motion that's happening here. It's just a really tiny brush and probably a little harder to see that motion. So keep on going here. I can see I'll have to get some more of the lighter tone onto this one. That's just going to have to happen in between. Now, let's see what we got here. Now, this is one of the more, I think, beat up quadruple zeros. This is the Cotman here. So, synthetic. And boy, you can see a big difference, right? There's plenty of room as far as how light or dark we could go. Plenty of room. So when we go back and do the final areas of the skin and stuff, I'm just going to pick a couple of them where you can actually see the faces. Because there's a couple of these where the face is almost entirely obscured. So just to save time, instead of painting 5 sets of hands, I think we'll just do a couple of those. And as far as the base goes, I'm just going to take just some acrylics and throw some deeper browns in there. And it's a very simple, just some grass tufts. That's all it is. Because again, they have to match the previous batch. Keep the line moving. And if I need to, I can soften out these highlights as well. Heck, if I don't like them at all, I could just take a makeup sponge and wipe it entirely away. Yeah, so this one here, there's virtually nothing there. And as far as the skin, it's also covered by plasma glow. So really not much to do there skin-wise. While I was there, I just kind of dropped off some, speaking of the plasma glow, last couple here. And when you see me working with the Gamelin Silver, actually, I'm just going to work it right out of the tube because my container is empty, as I saw. And it's really not that thick when it comes out of the tube. You don't really... It's one of those rare colors where doing the usual thinning process doesn't really have the same kind of benefits that it would on just about every other oil color, because the stuff dries super fast all on its own. It does not need a whole bunch of help in drying faster. So you're covered there. And it's almost, especially the way we're going to use it, it's almost a little bit easier if it is on the thicker side. Because remember, just because it's out of the tube, it doesn't mean that it's going to be, the application has to be thick. It does not necessarily coincide, because we can dry brush it on, and we are going to be doing an approach really similar to that. At least I hope that it's clearly visible. All right, so we're pretty far along now on the scarves and skin. We're going to halt there, and now we're definitely going to jump into the metals for sure. That's for sure what we're going to do. If there's other stuff we can get to, we will get to that as well. Let's hit those metals next. Let's dive into those metals now. And we've got our homemade filbert, and we've got our silver, again from Gamlin. Now, just some companies, their metal paints are better than others. Just for whatever reason, Winsor Newton, just none of theirs seem to work, and not all the Gamlins work either. So it's a hit or miss with these things. Now, of course, you've got the MIG ammo paints; those are always going to work. So let me see if I can dig that out for you here. So this, and I think there's 5 different of the metal, like steel type colors. There's aluminum, blackened steel. I think there's a steel color. Then I think you also have maybe a gold and a bright gold. Not so much in the not silver range, because again, they're originally intended for models, right? 1/35th scale models, that sort of thing. So they're obviously going to focus more on just this type of metal, less on the gold. So we have this pretty dry, and it's still mixing with that pre-glaze. You can see the dark on the end of that. So we gotta go back over here, and you can see how thin that is, despite the fact that is not pre-thinned in any way, shape, or form. Not at all. But as you can see, it has an immediate impact, and it mixes. That's why we got the pre-glaze in there, so that we could take advantage of that. This also has to be metal. There's some metals over here and here, but I think we'll just kind of do those with a smaller brush. Now, as far as highlighting this goes, we might use the iridescent pale, I believe it is. That is from Williamsburg. It doesn't have to be super bright. I mean, this is not a sword or something like that, so we don't necessarily need these to be super bright. In fact, I'm not sure how much more I might go beyond this as far as the lights. Actually, I'm going to go back in here and do more with the darks, if anything. I do have some goggles there. I forgot about the goggles. This is why I didn't do much around the goggles before, because I knew we are going to have to essentially just dry brush this over the top. And by dry brush, look at it's hard to even see it on my hand. And that's with the silver out of the tube, so you don't really have to drive yourself nuts trying to thin that stuff down. In fact, I would just say don't even bother. I'd just save yourself the trouble. It works out of the tube well enough. I think I'm just going to keep that jar just so that I can have the paint in the photograph so people can see that's what I used as far as the color list, a de facto color list, because it's way easier to get that in there than a paint tube, obviously. I think I forgot about these extra cartridges right here. I mean, look at that. It's so simple. And with the acrylic versions, it doesn't really work so well because, again, you're going to see that dry brush. Look how dark that is on the end there. That is the pre-glaze that's on there. All right, let's just hit the plasma gun here. Now, there is a little bit of not silver type color in this. It's, again, probably something I will do in the off-camera phase. There's only just the one plasma weapon from the other unit or other squad anyways, so if they were all running around with these things, different story. All right, now let's pop into the smaller brush here. And just quickly start to, and there's very little thinner here. I mean, everything you've seen so far, there was zero thinner in that brush so far. So again, that's why I don't feel like you need to thin these down in the jar. It's very different, and they dry out of the tube. They dry within a couple of hours, I think. You thin them down, now you've accelerated that even more. And they flow pretty well. And look at these, don't have the crazy kind of particles in them that you'll see in some of the lesser metallic paints. Did we do that there? We did that there. So very soon we're actually going to come back in here and add some of our darks to the metals, especially on the las rifles. Just wanted to make sure. I think I didn't do the goggles on this one. And this is where you'll see in general, the indigo mixed with the with the silver there to create that almost like a blackened steel, right? We're almost there. Is this the last one? Yep, it's the last one. Back to our dry brushing here. But it's dry brushing that blends. And now you know why we did the bulk of the skin tone stuff first. Just let that just right over the top. And oh yeah, this over here. And now we're good to go. Try and work in. Start to think about some of that darker metal color here. Have ourselves quadruple zero. We got ourselves some indigo. We have ourselves some silver. So what we have there is a very, and heck, we could even throw in a little bit of black there too, but it still has a bit of a metallic look to it. That's the key thing. And this is where we can kind of come in here and really get some sharp delineations here. I mean, doing the dry brush thing, if it can sometimes soften that line, we wanted to sharpen up that line just a little bit. And then here, right here, we need a sharper line there. That is what tells you, remember, that universal sign for cartoon glass, right, is that sharp edge. We need to sharpen up that line there. This one especially, is it just got a little bit lighter here on the side of the las rifle, so we darken that down. But we still keep that nice edge light, because with the one thing about the metals here is it's, ironically enough, it's easy to get them to that lightest color. It's really hard to shade those darker. But you just can't get much lighter than that particular highlight. That's about it. You add white to this stuff, it's dead. It actually will be darker. Believe it or not, adding white will darken it because you lose the sparkling effect. And it will look darker. And I'm pretty sure that is not what you want in your metallic highlights. But we are, for sure, sharpening up that edge very nicely. Like right here. Okay, because it's just kind of a blob right there, and all of a sudden, bang. That just got nice and sharp. That line just got nice and sharp. Remember, typically, and this even goes for the acrylic paints too, the darker paints allow you just to work thinner than any of the lighter stuff. Is that 100% the case? Not 100%. There's very few things that are 100%, which I know can disappoint some folks. They like to know that if I do this 100% of the time, it will always be this way. Nope. Unfortunately, there are very few things. All right, so I've got that pretty well set up there. Okay, oops, there's a couple of sections here I want to make sure I get. For whatever reason, these were also metal. I don't know why, they just kind of were. And these, for whatever reason, those don't actually get any metal color. I thought that was very interesting too. And I think we have just about every. Now let's get to the plasma gun here. So I'll take a peek at this, and sure enough, yeah, we want to get some darks in here. And in acrylics, this was done with metal medium, as opposed to here, we're just using the Gamlin silver, or you could, like I said, you could use the, I almost said Vallejo, but you could use the MIG ammo silver. Now I think there's a, yep, a little bit of a brownish tinge to that. So I'm going to take some Terrosa. Let's see if this makes it too pink. No, it doesn't really make that very pink. I can just throw a little bit of yellow in there. I think that will now take it off of the any measure of pink that might be there. All right, so now we've got something that just looks a little bit less silvery there. Take another peek at that. I'm going to lighten that up a touch. Now I do have, again, is this the iridescent here? Iridescent pearl white. That is from Williamsburg, and put as close to that silver as I can. You can see how much lighter it is. And it actually, when you paint on it does actually get lighter as you paint it on too, I think. So can you see this? It looks like it. We won't do a ton of this. We'll just do a little bit here and there. Oh, over here. And it is definitely something it's another one of those things. You don't want to mix white with it or anything, because all it's going to do is it'll kill the entire metallic effect. You'll just not going to be a result that you want. Just going to try and hit a couple of spots here again with the iridescent pale. Just right along that top edge. Maybe the top of the goggles too. Maybe even that little item there. Maybe even just a suggestion on a couple of the top edges there. A little bit of TMM, I suppose. Then we just got a couple more here. And then from this, we move on to things like the backpack, maybe the legging, just some of the other kind of ancillary surfaces here before we swing back around for more detailed stuff like some of the faces. I think we got one last one here. Just trying to get a couple of these edges, right? Not even necessarily all the way to the end of the thing. Now, of course, it would be fun to do that sort of heat type of thing, right? The purple and the blue and everything, but that's not what was asked for, so we won't be able to do that. Hopefully, maybe there comes a time where we get the opportunity for something like that, because it's kind of a neat thing to do, and I'd really love to do it in oils because it would be that needs to be blended very well. That type of effect, it's got to be very smooth, and it will be so much easier with the oils. Okay, there's your metal in place, good to go. All right, so next up we're going to hit things like the backpack and the legging and other like some of these other areas that are brown, the shoulder things here, that sort of stuff, and we'll get that next. Let's get to some other lighter colors here, like those browns and even on the backpacks and such. Now, what I'll just do here is I'll take some of that's that permanent green. I think I was basically just taking that and we're mixing it with the black. And then just kind of dusting it over the top of our pre-glaze here. So we'll do this real quick on these. They weren't terribly light, I have to say. When I looked at the differences between what I had and what the sample figures were. So not very much. Again, it's just a permanent green, and we mixed it with a little bit of the ivory black. Then we'll have to lighten this up a touch. Not too much. Probably we'll use our brilliant yellow pale for that. Yeah, we don't want to do too much here. And I think I'm going to steal a little bit of that Terra Rosa into this too, so that it doesn't get too greenish. I'm going to actually steal a little bit of the yellow now, because it was just getting a little bit too, yeah, and that might be just about it. Like I said, I will probably be going back into these and doing some finer adjustments when I have my lights on and such. These almost look like jerry cans. It's really weird the way I see the folds in here. Like, are they folds or is that? I don't know. I have not been able to discern that. And there is a radio antenna on the back of all these, so maybe they're less of a backpack and they all have their own radios. Almost there. Now I will go a bit lighter on this next one here, but it's going to be very dry. You can see I'm kind of scrubbing away some of the paint. This is the advantage of that filbert, right? I have that sharp edge to work with. Now we're up here. And then I'm going to pretty much take something like a Terra Rosa, mix that with a little bit of the asphaltum maybe for the rifle stock and these elements here. The leggings, it was kind of hard to settle on just something there. It's almost a bit of palette sludge. Light palette sludge is what we used on the leggings. And away we go here. Like so. better. And I might even, I know on the session that I did on Twitch, I actually went in with some darker colors and hit that too. Where's my other homemade filbert here? There it is. There's some of our I'm going to go Terra Rosa, a little bit of the burnt umber. The stock, I'll just go back in and do some silver on that. The scorpions do get kind of light there, but there was no metal on that. It's very interesting. No one was more surprised than me that of all places there was no metal paint there, or no metallic paint there. The boots are going to get a little bit of a reddish brown treatment too. Again, the Terra Rosa and the burnt umber, that's kind of a neat little combination. Again, hit the scorpion there on the side. That stock, I don't know if that has to really be terribly. Yeah, I don't think we have to make that the brown. Not quite sure you'd want a wood stock on a plasma gun. That could be a questionable safety choice. Back to our straps there. I'm not going to put too much effort into that because I still have to get some highlights on the tuna, some of those brightest highlights there. Can't choose this. To that strap. Let's see if we can make this even a bit lighter now. Didn't necessarily want that black to get in there. That was not part of the idea. Just going to get a little bit of light there on the scorpion. Use a little bit of the brilliant yellow pale. Almost sort of tone that down a bit. Okay, I think you can see it right there. And it's still picking up the colors that are underneath there. So even there, you can see a little bit of dark on the corner of the brush there. Yep, it's still picking that up. Of course, like I said, if you were painting these, and you could almost even plan on each layer, or after a certain point, you let it go, you let it dry, you maybe work on something else, or that's all the time you have in that particular work session. Right up there to that shoulder pad again. Last one here, and then we'll get down into those leggings and the color that you can see it's sort of a combination of highlighting with what's on the tunic there, but also still some of this brownish color. Boy, really, you can see I got the whole corner of dark on the end of the brush there. Good enough there. Now let's move on along here. Let's see what we can find as far as a color goes. Let's see how this works. Is that a little too reddish? Yes, it's too reddish. I'm actually going to use a little bit of that's some of the ivory black, and that tones it down, I think, to the level I want. And then I can hit these with the highlight using the brilliant yellow pale, and that should just about do that. And as far as the bases went, there was a little bit of I think I actually used just some Reaper red liner or something like that, just to do a couple little darker glazes into that. It was really nothing very special. Next, after this, we'll pick out a couple of these where the face is very easy to see and it's not covered by goggles and scarves. I think there's 2 of those. And we'll just kind of tackle the rest of the skin tones. And then we'll sort of do a little bit of a final wrap-up thing where maybe we throw some of the lightest highlights on the things like the shirts, other little highlight things. Stuff that maybe doesn't even really show up as you're first looking at it until you have some other areas painted, and then it becomes a little bit more evident, like, oh yeah, that might need to be a little darker, that might need to be a little lighter, whatever. All right, so we're going to see what happens as we add that brilliant yellow pale into a couple of areas here. And hopefully what will happen is that will mix. I see some darker paint on the end of the brush, so it does look like that was mixing as I was hoping. Because these actually took a long time with the acrylics because, well, we weren't getting the blending like we are here, potentially, so. Back over here. And I think it's pretty obvious where we're focusing on some of these with our lighter area, where hopefully most of the light would actually hit anyways. And then in areas where it's sort of in shadow, well, a little bit darker. If need be. Now, some of these, there was a mold line that ran through it, and some of the texture had to just be sacrificed in the name of getting rid of the mold lines. So sometimes that's where you have to just kind of go back in and maybe paint some texture that you had to wipe out. You didn't necessarily want to wipe out that texture, you just kind of had to. And as long as things are cast, they will always have mold lines, and they will often enough be in inopportune places. And these are all resin. All of the Victoria stuff is resin. So sometimes resin has its own crazy things. And I think we got one more of these left. Yep. And you can see it's so nice to just be able to really do this one brush stroke and know that they're kind of just blending themselves. Like for whatever reason, this particular pose, there's just that hole in the back of the leg there. I don't know why. I think I'll get just a little bit lighter color on the other side of this, and same here. Again, letting the brush blend things a little bit. And I might just take this, see if I can't get just a few more lights on the scorpions on the shoulders, because I remember doing that, even on the acrylic ones. Wrong way. Last one. Good to go. That is that. All right, next up, we're going to pick a couple of these that have the most face showing, and that's definitely not that one. So these two, we'll take these two, we'll do the skin on the hands, and we'll do the faces, and we're going to tackle that next. So with that Fanchon Red out on the palette, we've got to add ourselves a little bit of rosiness here. And as you can see, we just kind of combine the Fanchon Red here with the Terra Rosa and our Brilliant Yellow Pale. It's not a profound change that we're after here. We're just trying to add that little, it is a little extra spark of liveliness here. And let's get our other one. And I typically add stuff like this, say on the back of the hands, sometimes in the kind of the forearm area. Let's see if we can get a little bit of this into the jaw and cheek area here. We'll also going to lighten this up. There is that red the white headscarf sort of thing, and we probably would want that to maybe reflect a little bit of light back that way. It's a little bit of a tinting process that's going on here. Get nothing terribly exotic, but now what I want to do here is just see if I can't get some white into the eyes. Now, this quadruple zero actually has a little bit of a hook on it, and sometimes people will say, well, oh my gosh, what do you do with the hook on the brush? Sometimes it actually can be helpful, and it was on some of the other ones. Let's see what happens here, because it literally allows me to work my way around some hard to reach spots. So we know we've got the other one to do as well. Now we have thinned this down. I definitely want to say we've thinned that down a lot. Not to the point where it's going to be running all over the place like a pin line wash. That's something you got to worry about with the oils. Now here, this is a real tight, there's a tight spot. And I'm hoping this works. Because remember, we put the lighter color in like this, and then we can cut it with our darker colors. This is always, being right-handed, this one's always a tougher one here. And I'm hoping that the fact that there's a hook on this brush can help me. Now, of course, sometimes it gets pointed in a weird direction. But just specifically brought out this brush because of that crazy little hook on it. All right, now I've got to go back and try and lighten up some areas on the face here. Nose, top cheekbones, that sort of thing. Not too much on the top of the cheekbones there. I mean, there's a shadow, right? I mean, they got these goggles hanging out. How could this be brilliantly illuminated in that one area? And yet you've got those goggles hanging right over it. So something to think about. And this is where the oils kind of come into effect here. We take maybe some of the paint out of that brush. Now you can see it really kind of separates. That's why I've got this other one here. And this one sort of becomes a very fine blending brush. Now, on the lips, let's see if we can get a little bit of this Fanchon red in here. We've got it mixed with some of the asphaltum there to keep it a little bit darker. Also, the rifle's in the way. So there's a lot of stuff that's making it difficult to get at this. All right, I'm going to see if I can get that bottom lip here. And let's see if we can't add just a little more rose in it right in here. I like to do this between the fingers right there, because some they actually have veins that'll run right. And even here, you can see there's this kind of pinkish color, even on my hand, even with all the gorilla hair that's all over it and everything else. So I'm thinking here, maybe we show that even more. Then we'll have to go back in and we'll have to work in the eyes. That's where things will get nice and interesting. This one a little easier. And once again, we're just kind of reinforcing the lines in between the fingers. Oops, that would have been too much straight up red. I'm going to get a little bit Terra Rosa into that. This is as much about getting a little bit of shading on the cheeks as it is trying to add any rouge there. Take this other brush. We will blend that a little bit. Now, you've seen me many times for things like eyes. I go into the blue liner, right? That's the Reaper blue liner. Or with the contrast paints, sometimes the Leviathan blue. But this indigo is sort of a de facto blue liner. Now, can we? Looks like you can see it too. So I'm kind of cutting down on the top there, kind of creating an eyelid. This one, again, tougher because of being right-handed. And that didn't quite work out the way I'd hoped it would. Again, I just keep bumping into things. That's bumping into the side here of the headscarf. That's better. Now we've got to try and put some eyes into these here. And I'm hoping, again, that little hook on the end of the brush will work in my favor. And that's not quite where I wanted that eye to go either. So let's try this again. I was hoping actually to have it looking this way, but maybe we'll just have it going the other way. As I see where the head is pointed, maybe we just have to have this looking the other way. See if this will work. Okay, and it might make it easier for that eye, since it just seems to want to be dark over there anyways, no matter what I do. So just kind of get looking off in that direction. While I have this here, I'm just going to solidify a couple of these edges. Now let's go over Is this the one? Ooh, that's going to be really... I don't even know if you can see it, because those goggles are just pulled out right over the... looks like you can. Ironically enough, that was almost a little bit easier on this one than the other. So you can see how the eyes themselves are sort of attached to the top of the eyelid. You generally want to do that. You don't want those... you don't want floating eyes. Or floating pupils, I guess. That's not what you're looking for. What we are looking for is maybe a little more light on the lower lip here. See if we can do that. This is that delicate balance where you thin it as much as you can without turning it into a pin line wash. We also don't want the lips to look too glossy, and if this gets too light too fast, they will just have sort of a gloss to them. That's also not something that we want. I'm going to try and add some of the lighter colors, a couple of these knuckles right here. Ends of the fingers. So hopefully this little exercise in a brush that has a hook on it maybe was helpful. And we're kind of combining it with another brush here again that we use as a bit of a blending brush. Let's go back to the other one here, see what we have. So that is mostly the brilliant yellow pale. There is a little bit of a skin tone in it though. It's not just a yellow white. Want to make sure that with the nose, top the upper lip there, and the chin has enough of a light on it. Going to sort of reorganize the brush, get rid of the lint that's on the end of it. And we'll try and do a little bit of a highlight on the cheek here without creating too much of an edge there. And this is going to require a little bit of blending there. Soften that a tiny bit. Oh, fingers here. 1 second, we keep getting cadmium green on our hand. Not terribly useful. So we'll hit these fingers here. And then what we'll do is we'll just take a couple of these, and what we'll odds and ends, right? Some of these highlights here. So that's the kind of stuff that we're going to tackle in our final phase here. And let's get to that next. Let's take care of some of those odds and ends here. Some of them will take the form of maybe some darker colors. Some will take the form of some lighter colors. Now I'm going to try and start out here with a little bit of the lighter, and that's going to be this brilliant yellow pale here. See if we can't snag ourselves some highlights on the shirts and the maybe even on the backpack a little bit. Possibly even on the leggings in a couple of places. Just a few, especially maybe where the light's going to hit those. Just to consult what we've got here. So we're trying to keep those in line. Now, for me, I actually try to get as much variety from one to the next. Other folks, they're not as into that as me. I just know as troops get replaced or whatever, unless they all went out on the battlefield exactly the same time and all encountered the exactly same conditions, they're probably going to have uniforms that are different colors, different amounts of wear and tear. I think you see where I'm going with that. I don't know, never quite understood they all have to look exactly alike sort of thing, because, and I know I've mentioned this a few times, especially in the army painting videos, people aren't going to notice. First of all, they're not necessarily they're not looking for it, for one thing. Second of all, a lot of folks not really trained to spot subtle differences. So I think you want to maybe cut yourself a little bit of slack. Give yourself a little bit of slack and say, you know what, I don't know if I really need to sweat that. And then the story that I always tell is from a very recent tournament, in fact, where even the army that won Best Painted, out of what, 40 some odd armies or whatever, someone came up to me after the tournament was over and they said, "Oh man, I feel really bad. I didn't vote for your army. I didn't even notice you painted the eyes." And anyone that was within earshot of that particular little exchange just should we let this person be driving? Because they might want to get some new eyewear. Because just so it's like I could tell from 10 feet away. So again, I'm not trying to be a downer or anything like that, but sometimes people just don't know. And then I realize there's some folks that say, "But I know," and that's all good too. That's all fine. If that's what you want to, if you want to do that, that's what you want. That is fine. It's your army, that's for sure. I'm just kind of relaying some of the experiences that I've run across. Now, we going to have to, yeah, we need to lighten the tops of these canteens a smidge here. And then get some darks on the other side of them here. So there's your light, and now for the dark on the other side of that. And then even, I think that could be a little bit more of the red. Now let's see if we can't lighten that a little bit to Terra Rosa. A little more Terra Rosa there. I think actually, no, there should be more of this, yes. All of a sudden I recalled, yep, there was more of a little bit more of that pale yellow there. And again, over here in the leggings, we're going to, speaking of that pale yellow, we're going to take some of that. And we're going to throw it in there too. It's right over here. So this area here, we'll just boom, like so. Maybe not quite that much. Let's get just a smidge of that over here too. Take the paint away. And then we'll just blend this here. Little bit of blending, never hurt anything. We had talked about maybe some darks here on these. sort of what we did, remember, on the rifles over there. Same kind of thing. I might try to just find a couple of lights here on some of these straps and such. Maybe even lighten the top of the or dagger or whatever that might be. And again, the base here, I'm just going to finish that off with the acrylic so that I can glue the foliage on there right away. And there will be some other army painting series where, at least for the color test figure, where I've done something like that, where it is I paint the base in acrylics just so that I can get the foliage glue down there. So here's an area where I just did some quick little blending. I want to do a little double check here. I might try to get a little bit of warm green in there. So yeah, this is just kind of some those odds and ends that I was just telling you about. So it's just a really light touch with this. So see where we got that dark in there? So some of that green poked its way into there. Little reflected light over here. And then we talked about indigo and that pale or that permanent green light for some of our darks on the pants. It's very much that field green color, that German field green. That's why I still use that permanent green light. It's just, and when you mix it with something, say like the indigo here, it gives it a little bit more oomph, right? So instead of necessarily making the pants lighter with highlights, we just kind of deepen the shadows. And I might even take a little bit of just a hint of black there, not so much to darken it, but to dull it down. So it doesn't get too blue. We don't want it to be too blue. But also we're going to hit some of those folds. Maybe even a little bit more on this. A couple places we got some highlights I see that I'd like to get on that strap there. Boy, this and this silver, I don't want to say it's dry on the palette, but I can definitely sense that it's been out there a little while, and we're only just talking a few hours. It has only been a few hours, and I can really tell. So you don't have the longest working time with it, so you definitely want to put a whole bunch out there. It's not like you're going to need a whole bunch anyway. But yeah, and less is more, as always. All right, so I think that's whoops, we have a little bit of the there. Does this need a couple of a couple little just edges, couple edges right there. Now I don't know how much this is gonna stand out here, but I will try to work in some of there's some pouches here and some of the straps and such. We'll see if we can work some of those. Get them some of these, just a little bit of light. I mean, they're in shadow. This is another reason why sometimes the idea of, okay, you paint this whole thing and then you stick the arms on. Well, you might end up with some seriously light shadow areas. So by having the arms there, it forces you to make the shadow areas darker. I mean, you're literally forced to make them darker. It's not necessarily a bad thing. I don't think I want the boots to get all that much lighter. Okay, so I do hope that this is helpful for you. Again, it wasn't supposed to be, it's not like an army painting series or something like that, but this was sort of a multi-phase thing this year. Well, how do we match something that was painted maybe with acrylics? Like here, I see that got a little too blue. All right, I want to make it a little bit more towards the yellow now. It's about matching colors, different mediums, right? Different ways of approaching what's essentially the same figure. We'll lighten that up just a smidge by virtue of what we see here. And maybe a little bit more greenish color on some of the canteen here too. So these are little adjustments that we make, little adjustments. And I will try and get you some pictures of these in the closing credits there so you can kind of get an idea of what they looked like in the end. So thanks again, everybody, for supporting this level and all the other levels. And I will try to include the link to the Twitch session where we painted the original 5 here, and then also get you a link to the regular video where we painted these guys in acrylics. So thanks again, everybody, and I'll catch you on the next episode.